Bueno, ese fue un día muy grande, día de mucha alegría.
That was a great day, a day of great happiness. For us, the struggle represented a delivery of ourselves to the Cuban people. We were idealistic revolutionaries.
I think it was the winter of 59-60 that Castro paid a visit to the United Nations. At that time, we were aware of communists among his entourage, of communist influence on him, but we still held out the hope that if he was properly briefed about it, he could be persuaded to remain a non-communist. As a matter of fact, although it's not, I think, widely known, an agency operative actually was sent up, identified as such, to meet him in New York and have a secret meeting with him to brief him on the communists in his own entourage. We were profoundly naive.
The Soviet Union was also uncertain about Castro. But if he could be wooed, the Soviets might have an important asset in America's backyard. During that same session of the United Nations, the Soviet premier, Nikita Khrushchev, saw an opportunity. Castro had been snubbed by a downtown New York hotel and had gone to stay in Harlem. Khrushchev paid him a visit. After he was deposed in the 1960s, Nikita Khrushchev recorded his memoirs on audio tape. And this is one of the audio tapes. There were 180 hours of them. They were taken out of the Soviet Union. They made their way to Time Incorporated. And Time ultimately gave them to the Russian Institute at Columbia University here in New York. They have never been heard publicly until now. On this one, Khrushchev remembers why he went to visit Castro.
I felt it would be better for me to make the first visit. This would underline our solidarity with Cuba, especially the condition and discrimination they were being subjected to. Secondly, the Cuban delegation was in Harlem, and the owner of the hotel was a Negro. By going to a Negro hotel in a Negro district, we would be making a double demonstration against the discriminatory policies of the United States of America towards Negroes, as well as toward Cuba.
Not long after that, Castro would declare himself a communist, and the Cold War would come to America's doorstep. It would take a while for most Americans to notice. 2, 3,
rock, 8 o'clock, rock, clock, rock, we're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on, the sun strikes 1 o'clock tonight. Clock, tonight. When the clock strikes 2, John will yell for more. We're gonna rock tonight. Clock,
But while Americans were busy trying to master a simple circle of plastic, they were circling the globe with a man-made satellite. In October 1957, into space.
The Soviets could use up to land a weapon on the United States from Soviet territory. At that time, it wouldn't be possible for the United States to have replied.
The critical thing, undetected fault in the first turned the launching into calamity. Not fatal, but disappointing.
From the President's office in the White House in Washington, D.C., we present an address by the President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Earth satellites, in themselves, have no direct present effect upon the nation's security. However, there is real military significance to these launchings.
President Eisenhower was determined to catch up militarily. We would also put a man in space.
These, ladies and gentlemen, are the nation's Mercury astronauts.
In this race with the Soviets, the astronauts would become the new American heroes. In much of the world, America needed fresh heroes. The American image of a peace-loving nation was under attack. Soviet policy was to exploit every situation, to divide America from her European allies. And in the spring of 1960, we helped them. An American U-2, a high-altitude spy plane, was brought down in the Soviet Union, and America lied about it.
department has been informed by the NASA that, as announced May 3, an unarmed plane, a U-2 weather research plane based at Adana, Turkey, piloted by a civilian, has been missing since May 1.
That turned out to be a mistake. We, of course, assumed that he was dead. Whether of the crash, whether he'd been shot down or whether it was a malfunction of the system, we suspected that he would not have survived.
Not only did Francis Gary Powers survive, but he was a prisoner, and the Soviets would soon produce him. It was a golden opportunity for Nikita Khrushchev, and he used it.
We smiled with pleasure as we anticipated the discomfort which the spies who cooked up this false statement would feel when confronted with the evidence we already had in our pocket.
Now, make no mistake, I was sure that sooner or later we're going to have a U-2, we're going to have this whole thing discovered. But the information we were getting was so valuable that I continued.
2 or 3 days later, after they took themselves out and got thoroughly wound up in this unbelievable story, we decided to tell the world what had really happened. We laid out everything just as it had occurred. The Supreme Soviet heard my report with great wrath and jubilation.
Well, when I saw what a terrible mess this lie had made of the thing, but it was a lie, of course, I just said, well, now look, there's the truth about the thing, and I did it, and that's that. When you get your fingers caught in the cookie jar, there's no use of pretending that you were out in the stable somewhere.
Успехом строить коммунистическое общество! Идет вперед к коммунизму!
And so the Eisenhower era ended on a note of embarrassment for the United States. In the Soviet-American competition, the Soviets were catching up. America was no longer the unchallenged giant that had stood alone at the end of 1945. Maybe it was time for a change.
The question before us all, that faces all Republicans and all Democrats, is, can freedom in the next generation conquer, or are the communists going to be successful? That's the great issue. And if we meet our responsibilities, I think freedom will conquer. If we fail to move ahead, if we fail to develop sufficient military and economic and social strength here in this country, then I think that the tide could begin to run against us. And I don't want historians 10 years from now to say, these were the years when the tide ran out for the United States. I want them to say, these were the years when the tide came in. These were the years when the United States started to move again.
The American image was tarnished. We had acknowledged that the Iron Curtain was a permanent fixture in Europe. We'd been beaten to the draw in space. We certainly had not accepted the idea of living with a communist nation so close to our shores as Cuba was. When we come back, Ted Koppel will tell us where President Kennedy took the nation into the 60s and beyond.